Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at the weekly meta breakdown for the Explore Best of 3 format. Now you might be wondering, where's Best of 1 this week? Well, I looked over the deck lists and you could pretty much just watch the video from last week while I can create a new video explaining the top decks, yada yada. It's pretty much the same decks as last week. Nothing really that new or interesting. So if you missed last week's, check that out. It'll give you the coverage. If you did catch last week's, pretty much what you saw there is the same info. Mono white humans, Azorius, spirits, Greasefang, mono red, pretty much the same kind of culprits, some Angels decks. But we actually got a good data set in for best of 3, which we've been missing for the last couple weeks. So I actually want to go over this and look at some of the performing decks of this week. And for those of you who are new to the channel here, what we do is every week we look at stats from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen, a companion tool that aggregates win rate data from users. You can use the tool itself. The link is in the video description. But we look at kind of trends week over week. We do this for all the formats. So if you're looking for any of those videos, check it out in the video description and you can kind of copy paste these deck lists, give them a shot and go from there. So we'll jump into this. We're looking at February 19th through the 26th. Platinum to Mythic rank, 22,000 matches. This is best of 3, so 44 to 66,000 games played. Couple programming notes. I usually do, so standard best of 1's already out for the week. Best of 3, I usually do it right after, but I'm actually going to be very shortly hosting and commentating on the top 8 of the Pizza Box Standard Open. This is the first big standard tournament with the new set. There's 128 participants in this tournament, so I want to actually use some of that data as well in the overall meta-analysis. So I'm going to be holding off standard best of 3. I'll also have top 8 coverage in my playlist, so if you want to see how the top 8 decks played out, gameplay of that tournament, and if you want instructions on how to sign up for that free-to-play tournament, that'll all be there. And then as always, just kind of a message I've been kind of throwing out there. I have a goal with the channel of hitting 10,000 subs by June. We're at 7,500 right now. So if you haven't subbed to the channel, hit subscribe, free, easy, helps me out. And if you're already subbed, I appreciate you. As always, if you could drop a like or a comment, it helps with the YouTube algorithm and helps out the channel. But let's jump into it. The top deck of the week is Rakdos Midrange, 65%. We're going to round up here. We're trying to give them just a C average. This deck here looks like it has shades of influence from the PT top 8 list, where we saw, I think it was Shoda, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Japanese players, bringing in Mutavaults into this deck. So it does make your mana base a little bit greedier, but it is a 1 mana creature land that can, when you're kind of trading for value, allows you to kind of supplement some of the dens and the hive, which tend to be a little bit more expensive to activate, but you have the Mutavaults that can attack in. They can also be used as because it's only 1 mana, you can tap the Mutavault itself to activate. So if your opponent happens to have something like an Invoke or a Liliana Minus or Shieldred's Edict, where it just says sacrifice creature, you can sacrifice your Mutavault instead. This is kind of red-black good stuff. Everything replaces itself or eats away at your hand or is removal, stuff like that. This version's on 5 discard spells, a Duress, and 4 Thoughtseize main. You have removal in Fatal Push, Power Word Kill, Shieldred's Edict, a Bank Buster for card advantage, Stomp in there, some Lilies for hand hate and sacrifice, and then just really powerful individual creatures. Bloodtithe Harvester is removal itself, creates blood. Works really nice with Fable the Mirror Breaker. You have Misery Shadow that causes your opponent's things to exile upon death, so any sort of death triggers get nullified. And then it's just a good mana sink. Graveyard Trespasser to eat away at the graveyard, gain you some life. Shieldred as a powerful top-end threat. We also have the addition of Black Cleave Cliffs to this mana base here. The rest of the deck, we have the sideboard. So usually with the sideboards, just kind of imply what type of decks you want to bring these in against. So Duress can be brought in against more of the control decks. Generally, you don't want it in the discard mirror. I would consider it maybe against mono green as well, just to hit their planeswalkers. However, some of their top-end threats do kind of dodge that, just being creature-based. Pithing Needle for any sort of activated abilities. As an example, if you're playing against the red-black Pyvar Priest deck. You can name Priest of the Forgotten Gods. You can name Planeswalkers. You could activate creature lands, stuff of that nature. Rending Volley, blue and white decks. Abrade, Catch-All, kind of 3 damage removal that could also hit any of the artifact decks. Bankbuster for the grindier games. So like in this type of mirror, you'd want your Bankbusters. Kolaghan's Command is also another good card in any kind of attrition-based deck. Matchup, also good against mono green to blow up kind of their artifacts that they tutor. Lily for like the more grindy decks, stuff of that nature. Extinction Event's very, very good against mono green. It hits all their creatures basically. They're all odd. Also decent against Angels, since you can hit their 3 mana spells. Ritualist Soot also hits everything in the Collected Company shells. And then Sky Sovereign is just a really good, useful removal-based option. The Extinction Events are also pretty solid. Same with the Rituals against the red-green Vehicles deck. Just hitting, like in Vehicles, you have some 2-drops, but a lot of it is going like Llanowar Elf or Elvish Mystic into 3-drop kind of curve. So that's with Rakdos. The next deck is Mono White Humans, another deck that has some influence from the recent Pro Tour. You have Ossification being played in this deck. This was another top 8 deck list. So you have Ossification in there, just catch-all removal. You're playing a lot of basics, so it's easy to kind of apply it there. You have Skrelv as card advantage, as protection. So you can give your things either unblockable or protect them from removal, stuff of that nature. The deck is Humans. The 62% win rate. I always kind of skip over that part. So you have a human synergy with things like Thalia's Lieutenant to put counters on all your humans. It also gets bigger. Luminarch puts counters. Hopeful Initiate gets bigger. Recruitment Officer draws you cards. Dauntless Bodyguards for protection. Adeline makes a whole lot of bodies. The bodies that it makes also trigger the Thalia's Lieutenant. Thalia itself for tax effects. And you kind of see all the synergies of the human deck, with Brutal Cathar also being a removal spell. This deck's taking advantage of a number of utility lands, and Mutavault also being a human. So what you can do is you can tap the Mutavault and then activate it. It's tapped, but it's a human. And then you can play Thalia's Lieutenant, so it gets counters on top of it. Castle Ardenvale for tokens, as well as a Agonjo as removal. Really clean sideboard here. Any sort of the aggressive decks, low to the ground style decks, Portable Hole's good. Guardian of Faith against sweeper decks, Redain against mono green or bigger mana decks, just to kind of tax. The flip side, Valkmira, can't say that word, is also very good against the Rakdos sacrifice decks. Normally, like Mayhem Devil, you have a bunch of like X1s to start, or like X2s, but this prevents the Mayhem Devil from targeting with each ping unless they pay 1 mana in addition. Sword of Forge and Frontier is really good against the red-green, like mid-range decks, like the Vehicles decks. While the Vehicles themselves, like Sky Sovereign, can hit your creatures, this protects them from that, and then it also provides you some card advantage, even if you run into like any of the mono-red aggro decks, which aren't as common in best of 3, but any sort of red-based removal, even in like the Creativity matchup, which we'll get to, all the removal's red, so you can give your creature protection. Wedding Announcement's very, very good against any heavy removal-based decks, especially Rakdos. It's hard for them. A lot of the removals 1-for-1. Now, they do have some sweepers post-board, but even just making your creatures bigger than their creatures has a lot of utility. We then go to Mono Green Devotion. So this is a really explosive, but does have some, depends on how your hand shapes up. So a lot of the decks I've seen they don't always have Nissa in it. So the kind of core, everything else is the same. I've actually liked 23 lands when I was playing mono green. I got my 5-0 for the event they had in January, the Decathlon in Explore with mono green. But I played no Nissas, played an extra land, and then I played a Sky Sovereign main. That came up clutch in a lot of games. But the core of the deck is you're looking to ramp early, put a bunch of creatures and pips into play for your devotion, and then use Nykthos Shrine to Nyx to generate a whole bunch of mana. You can tap and untap either like Wolf Willow Haven Enchanted Lands, or like if Old Growth dies, or just the Nykthos itself to generate huge amounts of mana. Storm the Festival is kind of the big payoff card that lets you find other pieces. The Kiora enables also card draw through playing big creatures. And then this is a Karn Wishboard deck. Like Cavalier of Thorns also finds you your lands. This is a very easy deck to sideboard with because you pretty much click submit. Karn finds you a whole bunch of artifacts with the deck. Graveyard Hate, Graveyard, as well as Library entering the battlefield effects. Now, notably, Creativity will touch base with this. This does not stop Creativity. Creativity exiles and then puts into play. It doesn't enter from your library. Artifact enchantment removal, naming like activated abilities, life gain against some decks, just throwing a Shadow Sphere onto like Old Growth Troll or Cavalier Thorns often can win you the game. Card advantage, combo hate, graveyard hate. This is very good against like Angels and any kind of go wide deck. Particularly good if you have a Cura because you can tap and activate at the same turn. We'll get to Cauldron in a sec. General catch-all removal, or like not all removal, but like a good removal spell for most creatures in the format, and then just kind of a win con in itself. God Pharaoh's Gift as a way to tax and gain life. Cityscape Leveler as just blow up anything, and then can also be come back from the graveyard. Great Henge for some card advantage and lifelink, and then Citadel as a land you can tutor. Now, the thing is, I like Portal to Phyrexia probably more over Great Henge, to be honest. That's a card that's missing here. And then going to Pestilence Cauldron. So this card doesn't have black mana in the deck, but you're fetching it because it's an artifact. You cast it with Restorative Burst, and it's an infinite combo. And the way you're able to do that is basically if you have Karn and Cure on the battlefield, Karn and Cure in the graveyard, and then Nykthos can produce 15 mana, you can basically loop it. So you cast your Kiora, you tap on tap Nykthos, generate more mana. Karn fetches Pestilence Cauldron. You cast Restorative Burst, you return to hand the Kiora and Karn in your graveyard. You recast those planeswalkers. The ones on the board go to the graveyard. You rinse and repeat, netting you mana, so you could potentially gain infinite mana. You also gain 4 life each time you cast Restorative Burst. Because Karn says from exile, even though when you cast Restorative Burst, it goes to exile, you can still fetch it from exile. It's not just your sideboard. Cast it in as many times as you want, gain as much life as you want, and then with the Karn Kiora package, eventually what you try to do is get Bankbuster, activate it with like the Kioras, tap on tap, you create a treasure token, and then you cast the Pestilence Cauldron, and then you can mill out your opponent. Also just gaining a bunch of life. Sometimes you just do it for value to get stuff back from your graveyard. But like I was playing Portal to Phyrexia, and that card was really good in like some of the Angels matchups and stuff like that. Alrighty. Next up, Izzet Creativity. So Reed Duke won the Pro Tour playing Izzet Creativity. This deck is pretty much the exact same deck except for the win con. So in the Pioneer version, you have Worldspine Worm and Xenagos, God of Rebels, or whatever the god Xenagos is. So Xenagos gives target creature, you double their attack, give it haste for the turn. Worldspine Worm is a 15/15 trampler. If it dies, you get 3/5/5 worms. If it were to be discarded, you shuffle it back into your library. The Xenagos itself is indestructible, so it's hard to deal with. So basically you can attack for 30 haste trample, and usually that wins it on its own. In this particular deck, you are playing the combination of Sage of the Falls as well as the Locust God. So this, how it works is they both enter at the same time. The Sage triggers because you draw a creature onto the battlefield with it. Then the Locust God creates a 1/1 haste flying insect, which then triggers Sage of the Falls, and you draw a card. And you can kind of keep doing that for as many cards as you have in your library. And you could create that many haste flying creatures. So that technically could win the game on its own. Because you could just haste kill out your opponent. You are limited to the number of cards. So if you're against Angels and they gain like 70 life, you can't kill them in one turn. You also can't directly win through a Shieldred because it'll kill you on the life gain. So you actually have to Creativity for 3 and hit your opponent's Shieldred, and then also hope that they don't flip into another Shieldred by doing so. And the combo is a little bit more interactive in terms of both creatures being a little bit easier to kill. While not fatal pushable, they still just die to like any sort of direct targeted removal spell. The core of the deck is about using the card Indomitable Creativity to target 2 artifacts or tokens. In this case, there's no other creatures other than these 2 in the deck, so you always flip into these. And like I was mentioning with that, so Grafdigger's Cage says they can't enter from the library. But this puts the card into exile first, so it changes zones. So that's a notable thing. You can also target your opponent's creatures to, like I said, to get a shield out of the way. So you make tokens with things like Secrets of the Key that make like various random artifact tokens. Fable the Mirror Breaker token also makes token. You have Big Score that makes tokens, so you can like end step, Big Score, make the tokens, untap, combo. And then Shark Typhoon makes tokens. You have Mutavault, which you can target as a creature itself, and as well as the flipped Fable the Mirror Breaker. You can put your combo pieces back into your library with both Valakut Awakening and Fire Prophecy, and then the rest of the deck's just like interaction, counter spells, and then kind of card selection. Post board, you could also move to Hullbreaker Horror, so in matchups where the combo doesn't really seem the most winnable, you can kind of shift into red-blue control, go full Shark Typhoons, go Hullbreaker Horrors, and then it's just a bunch of like various counter spells. You're usually okay in the creature matchups, but kind of suffer against the heavy removal decks as well as control. And then just Rending Volley good against like the humans decks and any like spirits decks, which are probably really good matchups. So there's that deck. You also could just incidentally win with like Hall of the Storm Giants. Last deck is Selesnya Angels, 54% win rate. And this is a deck that's kind of playing the 8 Coco effects to find your angels. You're trying to gain a bunch of life. This version's interesting. It's actually on 6 elves. So looking to ramp you earlier into the Collected Company, but itself has a smaller number of angels, only playing 2 Youthful Valkyries. So there's going to be times where your Cocos just find Elvish Mystics. So a little bit lower of a density of threats, but the kind of core of the deck is you want to get out a Bishop of Wings, as well as some combination of Righteous Valkyries, and then try to gain 5 or more life a turn. That makes more angels, and then it just kind of cascades. Once you're at 27 or more life, all your creatures get +2/2 boost for each Righteous Valkyrie you have out, and you kind of just go wide in the sky that way there. Giada makes all subsequent angels that enter the battlefield enter with additional counters on them as well. This version's also on Amiria's Call to make angels, as well as Turn Timber, so lower line count, but it's being offset by these spell lands as well. Also seen Razor Verge Thicket being introduced to this deck, and a single copy of Nykthos. The sideboard, Pithing Needle, like I said, activated abilities as relevant to be named, Portable Hole for removal, Shaper Sanctuary is really good against like Rakdos or any heavy targeted removal decks. Dampening Spear can be brought in against mono green or any kind of Stormish deck. There's not too many. It's really good against Lotus Field, but that's not a deck in this format, so pretty much being brought in against mono green as kind of a tax effect. There is Anointed Peacekeeper as graveyard, or like kind of a taxing effect. So similar to like Elite Spellbinder, you can kind of look at their hand, tax them, and go from there. I would probably just... So Spellbinder also is a cleric, but it only gains you 1 life off Righteous Valkyrie, where this will gain you 3 Vigilance versus the Evasion and the Sky. I'd probably play Spellbinder, because the thing is, this only taxes while it's in play. So as an opponent enters the battlefield, look at opponent's hand, then choose any card, spells of the chosen name, activated. Yeah, so I think this is only while it's still in play, where Spellbinder puts it like out of the hand into exile and costs 2 more. So it's kind of a tax like that. Redain for the same reasons I mentioned in the mono white deck. Skyclave Apparitions just as more removal. And then Ajani, Strength of the Pride. Very good in the mirror, but in creature mirrors, when kind of the board gets stalled, when you're able to get to 35 life, it's a one-sided board wipe. So it could often be just game winning on its own. Also a way to kind of gain you a bunch of life and make some Ajani Pridemate tokens. So that is it for Explore Best of 3. A deck that I was playing a bit of and really enjoyed is the Transmogrify deck. I got a video of this on my channel, but like I don't think I've had more fun playing a deck than this deck here. It's basically similar concept to the Creativity deck, but not all in on like a combo kill. It's basically just using a bunch of like incidental tokens, and as early as turn 3 with stuff like Careful Cultivation or Courier's Briefcase, you're able to Transmogrify and then always end up into Atraxa, and then just refill a whole bunch of cards to your hand. It's got like Chariot in here to make copies of like Obnixis tokens. Obnixis can instant ultimate off Atraxa. I had a win like that, where opponent was at 13, I attacked with Atraxa, sacrificed to top Nixus and then dealt 7 to the opponent. Liliana's Death Majesty makes tokens, can mill into it, also could either reanimate, like discarded or removed. I had a game where Fable, draw discard, discard the Atraxa, attack with the token, make a treasure, cast Liliana, reanimate Atraxa. This deck was so much fun to play. Like I said, I have the Gruul vehicles built, and I have like in paper, and then I have like a shell of Rakdos Midrange, so I'm actually trying to find how I can pick up some Atraxas on the cheap to build this in paper and play it in Pioneer as well. But this deck was really fun. But that's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing. Hope you have a great one and stay safe out there.